So let's look at a typical scientific experiment using mice and a maze. First, we come up with a research question about learning. Say, how does alcohol affect learning? We set up the experiment by dividing our mice into two groups. Let's say we have 20 mice, so there will be 10 in each group. And we make sure that we have the same number of males and females in each group, and that there's a similar range or distribution of ages. Okay, so far so good? So then we carry out our experiment, measuring everything very carefully and writing everything down. That's what we call the data. We have two groups of mice. One of them will be the group without alcohol, called the control group. And the second will be the group with the alcohol. They're called the experimental group. We put the individual mice from the control group into the maze and time them to see how long it takes them to find the cheese at the end of the maze. Then we figure out the average time for that group. We do this 4 times for each group. The assumption is that the mice will learn how to get through the maze to find the cheese. So we assume that the second, third, and fourth times will be faster. Now, the experimental group is a little more complicated. Why? Well, we have to give all the mice in the experimental group some alcohol. And we don't want any bias, remember, so we have to give all the mice the same amount of alcohol, and we have to wait the same amount of time before we put the mice into the maze, because we know that it takes time before the alcohol will reach the brain. We also know that if we wait too long, the effects of the alcohol will wear off. In other words, decrease and eventually disappear. So anyway, we then put the mice from the experimental group into the maze, time all of them, and then calculate the average of the group. We do this 4 times also. All right, so now we can compare the two groups. In order to do this, we need to look at our numbers, or data. We found the average time to finish the maze for each group on each attempt. And if we look at the numbers, we see that overall, in all attempts, Group 1, the control group, is faster than Group 2, the experimental group. Then when we look at the progression, in other words, the sequence of attempts, it's clear that the mice in the first group are improving. Every time they go through the maze, they are faster than the time before. Looking at that information, we conclude that the mice are learning how to make their way through the maze. Let me point out that we don't know for sure what is happening in their little brains, but from what we see, we think they are learning. If we define learning as going through the maze faster each time, then they are learning. Now, when we look at the progression of the attempts of the second group, however, remember, this is the group with the alcohol. Shall we call them the drunken group? What stands out is that the mice are actually slower each time they go through the maze. As researchers, we conclude that the mice in the experimental group are learning very little, and the alcohol is affecting them in a negative way. According to the scientific method, if our conclusions are true, we should be able to duplicate the experiment and come up with the same or similar results. And if our conclusions are false, we need to change the experiment somehow or change the research question.